of 1937 was that they had an image problem and they didn't have a formal resolution sort of thing to convince the Muslims of what the Muslim League was working for. In 1940, Lahore resolution was passed. Lahore, this was a very, very important step for the formation of Pakistan movement. This resolution meant that Muslims actually knew what they were struggling for now. They had made it clear to the population of the subcontinent, to the Muslims of the subcontinent, that these are our goals and this is what we're working for. This Lahore resolution was passed in a meeting of Muslim League in 1940, and it took place in the present day. The monument Minar-e-Pakistan stands in that park. That was the place where that meeting took place, and today it comes under the district of Lahore. But in the subcontinent, obviously, um, that is where the meeting took place, and that is where the resolution was passed. 1940 Lahore resolution, it on 24th of March the resolution was passed, and this resolution later became known as the Pakistan resolution, because this was the, you could say, the first formal resolution on which the struggle was based on, the Pakistan movement struggle. Why was this resolution passed? Number one, because of the tyrannical Congress rule. Muslims had seen that it was important for them to have to be organized and to be clear in what they wanted. Because obviously, even if they continued to oppose British, even if they wanted the British to leave, and let's say if the British had left, in that case, Hindus would have always dominated Muslims the way they did in the Congress rule. Number two, Allama Iqbal in the 1930s Allahabad address had a very, very clear idea of a separate homeland. It was presented in 1930. This is what he wanted the Muslims to struggle for. Chaudhry Ahmed Ali also presented his Now or Never scheme in 1933. We're going to talk about the biographies of these leaders after we're done with section 2. But for now, just know that 1933's Now or Never scheme was presented by Chaudhry Ahmed Ali. And that scheme meant that we need to struggle for independence now, or we would just have to live under the tyrannies of the British and the Congress forever, because this is either it's now or it's never. This is what the this was the general idea of the Now or Never scheme. And Muslims knew that independence would only be achieved if the British, number one, had left India, number two, if they had got freedom from the Congress tyrannical rule. It was important for the Muslims to ensure, to secure their freedom, to secure independence before the British had left. Because once the British had left India, it would, I mean, Muslims knew that it would become very, very difficult for them to get independent from the Congress here. So this is what they were working for. So they wanted to ensure that they get a separate homeland before the British actually decide to leave India. So now you're going to see from 1940 onwards to 1947, the entire struggle would be based upon these lines, these ideas. Obviously, the 14 points were a forerunner for all of the resolutions that were being passed. Muhammad Ali's Now or Never scheme, Sarshid Ahmed Khan's Two Nation theory, Allama Iqbal's ideas in the Allahabad address. All of these workings were there, and Muslims were actually now more organized, and they're working on these lines. Crip's mission in 1942. Okay, so during this time of 40 to 47, British were also trying to make negotiations. They were also trying to introduce certain. Uh, let's just hold on for a second. All right, guys, sorry for the disturbance. Acha, so I was telling that from 1940 onwards to 1947, the British were trying to make certain negotiations. Muslims are also working for freedom. Congress was also working for self-rule. So all of the three important segments of the subcontinent were working on different lines there. Crip's mission was introduced as a plan by the British in 1942. This is an attempt by the British to negotiate further. So what happened was they basically produced, you could say, a framework as to how the India would be governed in the years to come. They told that they'd be giving a dominion status to India. A dominion status meant that central power would be with the Indians. They would govern their country according to themselves, and the British would not interfere in these matters, whereas Congress, uh, it was somehow in line with the ideology of Congress. And then British also gave provincial autonomy to certain provinces. They said that provinces could opt out of this dominion if they wanted to, and they could form their own governments. So these were the two major points that were presented in Cripps mission plan. Now, this plan was rejected by Congress. Number one, why? Because Congress wanted a very clear and immediate power transfer. They thought that the British would just tell that, okay, this is your country, you can now have it, and we're leaving. But this was not the case. British were still there. They were just giving them a dominion status. They said we won't interfere, but we're still there. Okay. This is what the Congress did not want here. And and why did the Muslim League oppose this Cripps mission plan? Because Muslim League thought that when the provinces would get an autonomy to basically opt out, this would this might cause, I mean, obviously this was in line with the agenda of provincial autonomy, but this would also cause some sort of political instability. And was Congress saw it as an opportunity for the Muslims to maybe getting a separate homeland, because now the provinces had been given this autonomy. Provinces had this autonomy to opt out of the dominion status if they wanted to, and they had this power to make their own governments. Congress opposed this because Congress thought that Pakistan, it would lead to creation of Pakistan here. Why? Because this is what the Muslim League wanted, provincial autonomy. So this is why these reforms were rejected. And thirdly, Muslim League again rejected these reforms for another reason. That was that British they didn't provide a clear reference to the formation of another country, because Muslims had presented the 1940s resolution and they were so, you could say, strong on the stance that they were not ready to accept anything else, anything less than a separate country over here at this point in time. So they rejected these reforms. Jinnah had opposed these reforms. Why? Because he wanted a clear-cut reference to the formation of Pakistan. And that is what was missing in the Cripps mission plan. Now, why was this important for Pakistan movement? Number one, because provinces could opt out. Number two, Jinnah rejected it because he made it clear that we need to have a separate country now, and this showed that Muslim League was so firm on their goals. Now they had a very clear determination that they will not accept anything other than a separate country at this point. And number three, Congress demanded an immediate independence from Muslim League. Um, and obviously British was there, so it meant that they would maybe somehow support the idea of partition before leaving. So, and this was an alarm for the Muslim League because Congress was demanding independence and immediate independence. So, guys, there are two things. Number one, an independent subcontinent. An independent subcontinent is an idea where there's no foreign power ruling. For example, British leaving India and Muslims and Hindus governing India according to their own choice. And then there is a separate independent country. That is what the Muslims are working for. Congress wanted independence. Muslims wanted a separate country. I hope this is clear, guys. We're done with Cripps mission. Is it clear to everyone? Any questions? Guys, I'd really appreciate if you can speak up or let me know your feedback. Acha. So the next part here is the Quit India movement of 1942. I still haven't received any response. Can you guys even hear me? Okay, finally. Thank you. मुझे लगा सारे सो गए क्लास में. That is the Quit India movement of 1942. Now, this Quit India movement was an initiative from the side of Indians now. The first Crip's mission was by the British, and this is Quit India movement is by the Indians, because Indians were now demanding that British leave India immediately. After the World War II, British were already weak because they had faced defeat. And Congress thought that this was the best time to exploit their condition and to demand more concessions and to demand the British to leave India over here. And obviously, Crip's mission had also been a sort of an alarming point for Congress because provincial autonomy was guaranteed. So, guys, there could be a 7-mark question here that why was the Quit India movement formed? So you need to know these 3 points. Number one, that Congress wanted to exploit the British post-World War II. This is the first point here. You need to also explain this point that British had already been in a very weak position, and Congress thought this was the best opportunity to exploit them further and demand more concessions. This is why they formed this Quit India movement to further pressurize the British. Number two, Congress was alarmed because of the provincial autonomy that was guaranteed in the Cripps mission of 1942. Congress thought that this might lead to partition in the future. This is why they wanted to secure their own independence before partition. This is why they formed this Quit India movement, that British, if the British stayed in India, they might be bringing more concessions for the Muslims. This is why Congress wanted to immediately somehow have a plan to just drive British out of India. Number three, Japan was threatening British of an Indian invasion because the British were in India. There was a threat that Japanese might invade India. So if the British would have left India, it meant the threat would immediately be over. So Congress wanted this threat to be over, and one way to just be over with that threat was to just drive British out of India. These are the 3 reasons to why the Quit India movement was formed. And this movement was quite unsuccessful because most of the leaders were not there to lead the Indians here. Gandhi and Nehru were arrested because of certain civil disobedience acts. There was no leader to guide. Number two, British had used severe violence to put this movement down. Thousands of people had died. British used force, aerial bombing, machine guns against the Quit India movement supporters. It was obviously, it caused a lot of violence in the subcontinent. This is why this movement was unsuccessful. And thirdly, Muslims didn't support Congress in this movement. Why? Because Congress wanted an independent India. Muslims wanted an independent Pakistan. This is why, because there was no lead as to how Muslims would get partition from the subcontinent. So Jinnah didn't approve and the Muslims didn't support this movement. These were the 3 reasons as to why this movement was unsuccessful. Guys, I hope you guys are writing these things down because these are the 7-mark questions that you'll be attempting later on. You need to know how to write a 7-mark answer. Okay, now the importance of Quit India movement. Okay, I mean, it was unsuccessful, but what was the importance of this movement to the Indians or to the British over here? Number one, Congress wanted to basically get independence. This is why they formed this movement. Muslims, this was another red flag for the Muslims that now they don't have to be with Congress for any other reform. They need to just make their ideology even more clear, because Congress was now organizing these mass movements to drive British out, and this meant that Muslims were in a very, very dangerous position at this time. If British decided to leave India at any point during 947, it meant that the Muslims would have never gotten this partition here. And then Quit India movement leaders were arrested. Muslim League, it was an advantage for the Muslim League to exploit this weak position of Congress as well. This is another reason as to why the Muslim League didn't support Congress. They knew that there was no leader to guide them, and they exploited this position. Jinnah declared Quit India movement as a blackmail. He knew that this was just an attempt to exploit the weakness of the British, and he supported British because at this point in time, British were also supporting provincial autonomy, and Jinnah didn't want to go against any. He didn't want to go against British at this point in time because he knew that a little this is just a little more work required, and by that they would just convince British to allow a partition of the subcontinent. And if, let's say, Jinnah had supported Quit India movement, it would have been it wouldn't have been good for the Muslims because it might it would have become a reason for the strained relations between the Muslims and the British. And Jinnah didn't want that to happen at this point in time because they were finally British was finally coming around to accept the idea of this autonomy of independence. Yeah, this is how important this movement was for the Muslims. Now, the Gandhi Jinnah talks of 1944, another initiative by the Indians. Gandhi and Jinnah met at Jinnah's residence, and they decided, and then they had, I mean, they met for a meeting. Yes, Amna, do you have a question?
Yes, sir. As Jinnah was opposing for a separate country, and Nehru and Gandhi wanted, Congress wanted to have whole India as under them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Muslims also wanted the entire India in the control of Indians, but they wanted a secure partition before that. They said, okay, British can leave, but they need to allow us to basically part our ways to get a separate homeland, and yes, then they can leave. But the Congress didn't want that to happen. Congress just wanted the British to leave without partition here. Okay. So Gandhi Jinnah
Okay.
talks. Now the Indians were again working for um to basically get a solution to the problems over here. And these Gandhi Jinnah talks were quite unsuccessful. They couldn't reach a compromise over here again. And the reason for that was that Gandhi and Jinnah had severe disagreements on certain points. Number one, Gandhi wanted defense, foreign affairs, and all of these important areas and ministries under the control of central government. Jinnah was supporting provincial autonomy at this point. Why? Because obviously provincial autonomy meant that Muslim majority provinces would get their own power, and they would also might choose to become independent at a certain point in time. Gandhi didn't want that. So yeah, he wanted central government. This is why there was a disagreement here, and there was no conclusion to these talks. Number two, Gandhi wanted the Congress and League to work together for independence first. And he said, okay, then we'll see if we need to give Muslims this partition. But Jinnah wanted the partition to be secured first and then just general independence. Okay. Number two, Gandhi had rejected the two nation theory, and he said that the Indians were one nation. And whereas Jinnah was immediately opposed that because two nation theory was the basis of the Pakistan movement. How could someone just oppose that? This is how these talks were unsuccessful. There was no, you could say, decisive um, conclusion to these talks. There was no solution to the problems, and it was sort of a deadlock again. The demands of the Congress and League were exactly opposite to each other. And then the British made another attempt to resolve the problems in 1945, the Simla Conference. The Simla Conference was basically another reform where the British introduced another frame of work or as to how the India would be governed. They said that there will be an executive council and there will be different seats for the Muslims, for the Hindus, for the Sikhs over here. Congress was given their own seats. Congress was also given a power to nominate one Muslim in the executive council. Seats disparity was unfair. And yeah, So this meant that Muslims will always stay in a minority. Congress will have power to nominate Muslim members of the executive council as well. So this Simla conference was also unsuccessful. Why? Because number one, Congress wanted to nominate at least one Muslim member. Jinnah rejected that. He wanted Muslims to nominate their own members here. Um, Again, Jinnah was dissatisfied because the seats were unfair. Muslims were not given the seats according to the weightage of the population, right? So what is this? This point here when we talk about the population difference and the seats, it basically is that you give the seats according to the population. For example, let's say if there are 100 people living in a certain area and 50 people in another area, if you, let's say, tell that 50% of the population will be represented in the councils, so those 100 people must at least have 50 members in the council, and those 50 members and those 50 in the population of 50 must have 25 members. Yeah. So what the British were doing were that, for example, if there was a population of 100, they were just giving 15 to 20 seats. That was unfair. So then Jinnah wanted that the percentage must be applied equally to all the areas, right? This was important. So now this is why the Simla conference was unsuccessful. Lord Wavell was the one who introduced this conference here in 1945. However, this conference was still important for the Muslim League because Jinnah rejected this. It meant that the Muslims were not making any compromise over here. Muslims got more support for the Pakistan movement. The deadlock between Congress and Muslims at this point in time was very, very clear to the British, and they realized that they won't agree on anything now, and partition is very, very important. Executive council was to be formed here. This definitely meant that the British were trying to maybe planning on to leave India because they were transferring power to the Indians at this point in time. Now there's this question during World War II negotiations aimed at independence. You can get a question that what were those negotiations that were aimed for independence? Crip's mission, again, this was also an event that was aimed towards independence. Gandhi talks in the conference. Then how successful were the events in World War II in achieving independence? You need to discuss the successes and the failures of these points. Again, this is a 14-mark question. So you can write either, because most of the events were not successful here. So you can either go for four failures or three successes. If you think that the events were successful, you can go for four successes and three failures. That's completely your choice. Uh, we're gonna get back to these questions, but okay, I think we should keep it till here because we've already covered a lot of content. Guys, please tell me if there's any question at this point.